Welcome to Whitetail Rendezvous Podcast. This is Bruce Hutchin, host and executive producer. Each week you will hear tips, techniques, strategies, and personal stories from some of the best and funniest whitetail hunters in North America. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you do, tell a friend on social media. If not, tell me and I'll make it better. Thanks for listening, folks. This is Whitetail Rendezvous Podcast, episode number 420. Hey, folks, we're heading out to central Nebraska, actually north of I-80, and we're going to connect with Jason Obermiller. Now, Jason has created something that he calls everything you need in one bag. What's everything you need? Well, you need a deer attractant. Everybody knows deer like to come to someplace there's food. The other thing is minerals and the importance of minerals. And Jason shared something with me that I really didn't realize. It's that during the months of January, February, March, that's when the bucks take the mineral out of the soil and they put it and store it in their bones. Why they do that? Because in June, July, and August, they're growing horns. And so there's a big connection. What happens in the wintertime and early spring to how big that Mr. Wonderful is going to be for you. So sit back, relax. Jason's got a lot of tips, techniques that he's going to share how to grow big deer. Welcome to part 2 of our Whitetail Rendezvous webinar series. We're going to head to Loop City, Nebraska, and we're going to connect with Jason Obermiller. Now, Jason is the founder of Rackology. Jason, welcome to the show. And hey, let the people know a little bit about you before we get into the program.
Thank you, Bruce. Well, I'm originally from Loop City, so I haven't really strayed too far from home. I'm a high school science teacher, and I guess that's kind of leads into how kind of Rackology was founded. I was doing my master's in biology on antler growth, and just really extend it from there. I'm also a professional taxidermist, which helps to really tie things together from the standpoint of I see a lot of these deer every year, the antlers that come through my shop, and I ask a lot of questions as far as what they're feeding, if they're feeding anything. And that really gives me a lot of insight on, on their deer as far as, what happens if they're only feeding this and what happens if they're only feeding that. And it's been a really great tool for me to, literally see hundreds and hundreds of deer to, kind of compare the results of what I've been finding. So teaching and taxidermy and, now Rackology is just, in my background, I've, hunted and fished my whole life. 30 some years I've been doing that ever since I was a little kid, and just always loved the outdoor and love the critters.
So give some background on the birth of Rackology.
Well, kind of back to what I was saying, I was, I was doing my master's study for biology, and I was doing it on antler growth. In fact, when we got published, the title has something to do with antler metrics and deer. I can't remember it right off the top of my head. But, when you research something like that for a master's, you tend to get super in depth and really go into what it takes for, deer and, elk, moose, everything was kind of mixed into that study as far as antler growth goes. And I basically, continued that research, finding out, all the nutrients, everything that deer need, which that wasn't that difficult to find that. The difficult part, with formulating the stuff was, everything's got to be in specific ratios, consistent ratios. And if certain minerals aren't available, for another mineral, and at the right ratios, those other minerals either won't be absorbed or they won't be absorbed as efficiently. And then it gets even more complicated as far as, other minerals that involve those first pair, other vitamins that involve different combinations. And it gets really confusing and crazy when you get really in depth, but that's, kind of the direction I took it. But I had no intention at all. There's no intention of ever coming up with Rackology when I started doing this. I was just wanting to have the best stinking stuff for my deer. And, even when I came up with kind of my formulation, I always kept tinkering with it and you know, researched pretty much everything else out there on the market. Because at the time I figured, hey, if somebody else is already making something like this, um, I'm just going to use their product. So Rackology wasn't even in my mind at the time. And the more I researched, the more I found out, they, you have the really bad ones, which are basically, there's really not a whole lot to them. There's ones that are, kind of decent. They've got the vitamins and minerals, maybe. They may not be in the right amounts or the right ratios. Then you got ones that they're pretty decent. They've got some of the right minerals and vitamins, uh, but not all the ratios are always square with you know what what I research. And I've talked to a number of other biologists that actually work for deer ranches, and what's really cool is these guys aren't doing anything for a business wise with this. This is their sole job is with these deer ranches. And in our when we look at our formulations and kind of what we've got going, and it's matching up with stuff that they've been doing for 20, 30 years. um, you know there's been a few little differences, but it's based off of them having pen raised deer versus us targeting more free range, which we've actually started to get into the pen raised stuff. We've sent some pen raised for deer and for elk. We're in a pretty decent sized uh, elk ranch right now, which you know when we kind of see what the results are with these guys is kind of when we'll come out more with what we found with them. But that's really how Rackology got started, is just off of me wanting the best thing for my deer and not being able to find it. So I started making it, and word kind of spread. My partner Eric, who's the agronomist, he was having this stuff. Eventually, started getting it bagged, and um, kind of the pushover was, I went in there one day to pick up a few bags to go put some out, and he says, "Well, we're out," and I'm like, "What do you mean you're out?" And he says, "Well, I just sold your last bags here the other day, and I forgot to let you know." And at first I wasn't upset, but I was a little bit, I don't know what the word was for it, anxious, because I was wanting to put the stuff out for myself. I mean, that's why I came up with the stuff, not to sell it. And here Eric is, in the meantime, there he went through almost a half a ton, selling it, and he's like, "Well, you got enough money now. You can, we can buy a few more, you know, you can get a few more bags. We'll just have another ton made." I mean, he wasn't selling it for but peanuts, I think, at the time. And one thing led to another, and it happened again. And finally, he's like, "I think you need to think about doing something with this." And I told him at first that I really didn't want to, because, I had some years of researching into this. And I kind of, like last time we talked, I kind of felt like that, whatever sitting over my brew pot, and I didn't want anybody to know what it was. And so I mean, that's one thing I hope people take from this, is that this was come about totally innocently, and totally from the standpoint of a scientific standpoint of wanting the absolute best for our deer, not just our Rackology meal, and our mineral, which is kind of our flagship products, but our food plots. We put extensive research into doing all that. Our food plot fertilizer, which I'll talk about here in a bit. We just basically, our thing is we're not going to spare any expense. We want the best of the best, and now obviously making it as the most reasonable price as possible for customers, because most of the hunters out there are like us. We can't afford to go out and you know spend thousands of dollars on stuff, or let alone, even if you just go into a store to buy a small bag, some of that stuff for just this little bag's like 20 some $30 for an attractant. And that's just not, that's not what we set out to do. So,
You know,
Bob?
it's, I think about for the folks that are listening and trying to bring a solution to their problem, and they're, let's say they buy your product and so on. I think there's probably an expectation on time frame. What do you see, when you're working with your herd and you start using your products for them? When do you start seeing a difference in your herd?
Well, I mean, that's the thing with you watch TV, and I think hunters have been, I don't want to say tricked, but or fooled, brainwashed. I mean, there's a lot of words that come to my mind over the last few years that, buy this and, you'll grow 200-inch deer, and buy this, it's the best thing, and blah, blah, blah. And you can't make a guarantee on, nobody can make a guarantee on what their stuff is going to do as far as growing these giant deer. Because if you back up to the science side of things, um, you can only grow, number one, what the deer is genetically capable of growing, and the number two, you got to have the right stuff available for them. So with that said, um, you know, as far as a good indicator, you start like after the rut. We start pouring it heavy after hunting season, because here we can't have it out during the hunting season. But as soon as the season's over with, we start pouring it to them pretty heavy, simply because they're worn down from the rut, and we don't want them, having any issues over the wintertime. And within 3 to 4 weeks, we're seeing a huge improvement on the body condition on our does and bucks, and especially the bucks, because they're the ones that are really rutted down. So as far as body condition, I mean, 3 to 4 weeks is a pretty quick result that you start to see. Um, as far as antler growth, um, main antler growth occurs, or I should say, antler growth. Um, the nutrients, the nutritional value that the deer need, they start packing that on February,
Uh-huh.
March. As soon as they lose their antlers, they start what they eat. Um, the minerals that can be stored on their skeleton, they have to first store that on their skeleton before they can make antlers. And a lot of people are led to believe, hey, put this stuff out, and right before season, and you're gonna over the summertime, you're gonna grow these big antlers. And that's not the truth. I mean, the deer need to first take it in over the winter months into the spring. They pack that onto their skeleton. As soon as their antlers drop, their pedicle, where the antler was attached, the stem cells there, they begin to start growing, like a new antler bud that's, it starts growing as soon as that thing sheds and heals over. Um, as far
You
as
know, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm
Go ahead.
thinking just, let's say I'm on my farm back in Tennessee, and I'm trying to say, well, I need this many tons of feed. How does one gauge, how much feed you're trying to put out for a period of time for the guy that's,
Well,
trying to consider that?
like our Rackology meal, and that was kind of our flagship product that I designed for the deer to be eating that like every day, or every other day, something they're going to consume, a few times a week, and get their DVM for that. Um, if if your deer are living in a place that's starved of you know appropriate nutrition, they're of course going to eat a lot more of it. Areas that's very high in nutritional value around, if you have a soil that naturally has some good mineral in it, they can go and they actually drink water, or somehow ingest that into their system, the dirt
Hmm.
maybe. Um, obviously they're going to consume less of it, because that's the cool thing is, our product is a limiting factor in itself. The deer will only eat as much as they need. We
Hmm.
have one individual that uh, his property is on the South Loop. It's all sand and grass pasture. It's almost 2 miles to any field, and so he goes through quite a bit of it.
Uh-huh.
Now you have an area that's not. I mean, that's like a worst case scenario there. You have normal area where they've got some more vegetation around. And, some of my spots, heck, in 4 or 5 months, or 3 or 4 months, I probably only went through 5 or 6 bags out of my feeder.
Yeah,
And so,
it's an interesting thing as you're just trying to think, and for me, the listener goes, well, how much do I need? And the answer is, well, you don't really know until you start putting it out. And then the second thing that I was thinking about as you were talking is about the uptake of minerals and storing it on the frame of the deer. And that's
mhm,
not a simple thing to do, is it?
no, no, it's not. I mean, the deer have to, when they absorb that, they turn it into deer mineral that's attached to their skeleton and in their system. Um, once that's accomplished, then when they start growing their antlers, they begin to pull it off their skeleton and they grow the antlers. And so, to start the process, they obviously need protein because, depending on the time that you gauge an antler, it can be, 30 some percent on up in, protein because it's a protein matrix. Like I said last time, the protein, it's like building a scaffolding, if you would, or like lath in an old house. That's the protein, and then what hardens that lath is the mineral that has to be pulled off the skeleton and laid down as that after the protein matrix has been finished or as it's finishing, then these minerals are laid down. And so it's a longer process. I mean, you watch them grow all summer, and those antlers are soft. They don't got a whole lot of they don't have a whole lot of mineral in there yet because it's actively growing. In fact, the tips of those antlers kind of look like bulbs, and
Hmm.
they're like a stem cell that is actively growing that antler out to whatever its maximum genetic potential is, coupled with what available nutrients that the deer has already taken in. Now putting it out over the summer months, is that going to do some good? Yeah, I mean, they don't they don't start to kind of start to solidify till towards the end of August. I mean, by the end of August, you're kind of getting maxed out to where antler growth wise. But we got a guy that just came on here last week, and he's going to be pouring it to them all summer, and he's putting out our straight vitamin and mineral mix also, so that if the deer are lacking in anything, it's kind of like going and taking a higher dose to get them caught up. But as far as gauging goes, yeah, you just need to go out and put a bag out and try it and see how much they're consuming of it. And different times of the year, they'll consume differently. That's kind of another cool thing. I've had guys that they bought the product and they put it out and they're like, man, this 50-pound bag was gone like in 3 days. And, that depends on the number of deer you got there, uh, their nutritional needs at the time. And then there's other times of the year where you put it out and they come and they nibble on it and that's about it. And so people that purchase the product at the quote unquote wrong time of the year, they could say, well, they just didn't really eat that much of this stuff. Well, more than likely it has to do with the fact that they weren't needing that nutritional value at the time. It's not like other products that put a high amount of salt, over 30% salt in there, so the deer just come and eat it all the time. And that's the thing that a lot of people have been misled to believe that, oh, they love this product. No, that product's got a bunch of salt in it, and you could have accomplished the same thing with a salt block, literally, as to what's being accomplished there.
So you're really
So
just attracting the deer. You're not really helping them out.
yeah, not with salt and with the other products. No, and like with our stuff, they'll eat what they need and what they don't need. Throughout the year, you'll see them visit the feeder for different time durations based off of what their need is.
In looking at this particular buck here, and this
Mhm.
is a buck that's a product off of some of your stuff.
You bet. That good friend of ours, Jess, he actually, I think, on our website or our Instagram or both actually, and Facebook, we've got some pictures of him that he gave us as a 2.5, 3.5, then him as a 4.5-year-old deer. And for us, I mean, on that property, you know, eh, genetics wise, obviously he doesn't have like 180-inch genetics, but when you see the difference, the jump that he made, at first I kind of argued with him when he showed me the trail camera pictures. He's like, I'm going to kill this deer. And I'm like, oh, that's good. He goes, this is the deer that I've been seeing for the last 2 years. He goes, I started feeding you guys the stuff last year and the thing just blew up to this. And at first I was like, no, I don't think that's him. And he says, no, he goes, he put that much on. He goes, I've been feeding other stuff before. And he goes, I've never had anything do this before. Uh, I didn't laugh at him, but I kind of chuckled a little bit when he says, I'm going to kill that deer. But if when you get to know Jess, when he says he's going to do something, he does it. And I don't know how many days it took him sitting to finally connect with this dude, but he was full Rackology buck. And in fact, he was actually coming through the area feeding on some of our Rackology food plots. So a really cool deal there. I mean, that deer really had, he's all the way around.
It's interesting, and I'll go through some of these other, and what we talk about is on, from your notes. Maybe we should explore some of these things so we make sure we cover the topic, because I'll drift off and go like, well, how well can we hold deer on your property with your product? And then if you're building the herd and then you have to cull your herd to get your genetics squared away, because just like raising cattle, if you don't have good genetics, it really doesn't matter that much. So
yeah, that's no kidding.
So do we need to, well, let's look at this. Let's talk about this particular photo and how it relates to what you're doing.
Okay, that's a group of South Dakota bucks, kind of northern South Dakota, that, they really hadn't been, growing a whole lot of size in that area, nothing spectacular anyways. And they started feeding this stuff, would have been that, that winter. And the gal said that, I mean, she definitely noticed a real jump in kind of all overall antler size on everybody. But one thing I really want, also to notice is, I suppose you can't see my cursor on my end, so I'm probably moving it around. Nobody's seeing it, but the body condition on those deer. A lot of people, the first thing they're looking at is antlers, and my whole thing was, if you have the healthiest deer possible, it's just a no-brainer that their antlers are going to be maximized also. And when you look at pictures of deer that have been on our stuff full bore, they just look, I mean, I grew up on a ranch. And so when you look at body condition of critters, you don't see ribs. Their hair looks sleek. They look super healthy. Even just the sheen and color of their fur. I mean, pet owners know this. You get good pet food and you have bad pet food, and your animal, just their body condition doesn't look as great. But these two here were, she said, were there every day. In fact, I have about 4 or 5 of their pictures of some other bucks. 2 of them that are actually bigger, but this is the one that I emailed Bruce. But that's kind of what's going on in that picture. The feeder, the dish thing is right behind him, the trough that's hanging off that post, so you really can't see it. But and one thing too, speaking of body condition, that I have to throw out there quick, I just got this news the other day, talking to one of our dealers in Texas, Chuck, on their place. He's been putting it out now since last year, and he goes, I got to tell you something. He said, I knew your product was good based off of the research, but he says, I didn't realize just how good it was. And you never really, I try not to, I'm not going to over exaggerate, and I'm not going to brag about things. It's just, it'll maximize their genetic potential is basically what I, tell people. Well, he said, he goes, you wouldn't believe this. He goes, I've fed about everything else under the sun, and we have never had a 200-pound deer on our ranch down there in kind of southern Texas. And at first I thought he said 200-inch deer. I'm like, 200-inch deer? I mean, that's a huge deer. I'm sure you have it. And he goes, no, not inch, 200-pound deer. He goes, we've fed everything and we've never even come close. And he goes, we've got a number of bucks this year that they're going to be over 200 pounds. And he says, and looking at past game camera pictures, he said the just the antler growth that we're seeing right now, we've never seen that in years past. And the antler growth comment was great, but what I gravitated more in kind of celebration was, not only was he a believer before this, but this guy it just totally cracked home. And that's what he's telling all of his customers down there now is, I mean, they're growing 200-pound deer. You don't see that down there.
As we're going along, and I'll get sidetracked if I don't ask you. So for the folks that are listening, they'll go, well, it sounds good. How do I find you guys? Or where are you at on social media so I can either learn more or find your dealer network?
Well, Facebook, obviously, we're on there. It's Rackology on Facebook. Instagram is Rackology LLC, so at Rackology LLC. And you'll see our logo with the double drop tine, double helix, the genetics. And then our website is www.rackology.org. So rackology.org on the website. And on the website, you can click on the dealer link, and then that'll take you. About every week I do some tweaking on there. I'm always doing something, I guess, but never. It's not that I'm never happy with it, but trying to improve. But I kind of got our dealers, instead of one big long list now, I'm getting it tabbed off into states. I figured out how to run the accordion tab on that thing. So that's where they can find our dealers, our dealer lists. And, lately I've been putting Facebook posts out in other states, on their deer hunting and bow hunting forums that will allow me. Some of them don't, allow for advertising, but I've been advertising, here in the last week pretty steadily, trying to get dealers in other states, because we get calls and emails, but shipping is the thing that is the problem. So, and we've got some other stores in the works right now that, I don't think at this point we're going to come right out. If you're following us on Instagram and Facebook, you'll find out as soon as they're available in these other stores. But we need the smaller store dealers, because those are the places where they build relationships, and guys might find it on a store shelf, but if they find a local dealer that carries it, guess where their loyalty is going to go. So, I mean, we need both. So, I think we're in 5 states now, but we're really working and pushing on, moving, north, south, and east of us.
Yeah. What states are those?
Well, I mean, from Nebraska, you go north to South Dakota and North Dakota, south to Oklahoma or Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and east. I mean, you got Tennessee, South Carolina. I'm not going to ramble off all the state names, but
you got quite a few in the east side too.
Yeah, that we're really trying to get into, and that's the big kicker is, we get calls from. I mean, we've sent bags clear out to Maine and Pennsylvania and New York and every place like that, and we've actually lost money. But it's like I told Eric, I'm like, people want the product. We just need to send it, and even if we lose some money on it, that's just how it has to happen, because eventually people are going to go to their local shops and say, hey, can you carry this stuff? And then, when we can ship a pallet of this stuff, that's when it cheapens it up.
You bet. Yeah. Freight is everything, isn't it?
It is. It's a limiting factor.
That's for sure. Well, we're going to go to the, we talk about, so far we've talked about the body size and the body mass of these deer, and, and reflecting their health, and the antler growth, which is also reflective. But, we're talking about the reproductive health here on, fawn and immune systems and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And so why don't we chat about that just a little bit?
Well, I have to say this first. This is absolutely one of my most favorite pictures I've ever captured, that I've ever seen. And I've had guys go, why? It's a doe and a fawn. They're wanting these big racks. And I mean, antlers are cool, but I mean, this right here it epitomizes, my vision of rackology. And that's, from the feeder to the doe to the fawn, you got them all lined up right there. The only thing missing, which I actually have a picture of the buck, is on the left side. But I didn't want to focus so much on the buck. I wanted that shot right there, and it was just to me, it's just one of the coolest pictures that we captured. And it just kind of the epitome of this is, if you were to take the same buck and the same doe, in a real world, we can't do this, but if you were to take the same buck and the same doe and have them, twins, so to speak, and this buck and doe never touched Rackology, this buck and doe identical, that's what they grew up on. Um, what what you'd notice is, as these animals produce egg and sperm, the better their nutritional value, the healthier the sperm and egg are. And really, your big bucks, because that's what people are interested in. Your big bucks at age 4.5, 5.5 on, their their antlers, their frame, everything about them is kind of decided when they're still a sperm and an egg, because the healthier that buck and doe are at conception, and their gametes are, which is the fancy word for sperm and egg, gametes. The healthier they are, the healthier that fetus that's growing is going to be, and the better jump start that animal is going to have on life. And so, you know, this fawn was conceived on it, and obviously, you got it going through the cycle right there before your eyes.
I think for folks, I've got a bit of a background in biology myself, and I think about, just genetics, and you can do as much as you can to take and optimize what the genetics will provide. If you don't take and do some degree of management of what you shoot and what you cull, you're only going to get as good as the genetics will allow.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think about survivability, in the marketplace for these guys.
Mm-hmm.
So an interesting shot. And then you have this one. These are some of the big boys.
Yeah, these are, well, the guide that sent me those. That's not his big boys, because he knows that we're putting this stuff out on Instagram and Facebook, and in the deer guiding industry, it gets real secretive as far as what you got and what you don't got. And if people are following us and they recognize something that they've seen or they know is in the area, there's obviously they don't want those tip offs. But yeah, these are a couple good growers. I mean, they're, by his standards, the one on the right, maybe a shooter. The one on the left, I doubt that they would probably take where they're hunting at there in Kansas. But um, he's been putting that out now for well over a year. In fact, I think he's going to yeah. And this summer, he's actually putting out all of our food plots and using our food plot fertilizer. But these are some really good deer that he's grown that most people would shoot. And evidently, he told me that these deer were at the feeder all the time. They were kind of hogs. He said they'd run the other deer off a little bit, but he's got 4 or 5 feeders.
When we think about on the food plots, so we're talking about genetics and we're talking about feed, and now we're transitioning to the plots and how you can affect, not just by feeding, but also on the nutrients coming out of the ground. So let's chat about this.
Yeah, this is just a couple of weeks ago, actually. I got the grass killed back here about a month ago. Eric and I finally had the chance a week ago to go out, and we rented a tractor tiller combo, and got the plot all tilled up. And as you notice, there's a lot of pretty heavy grass there. So we actually went over the thing 2 or 3 times to get it tilled in good. Eric's planting our sanctuary plot mix there, which is a very good combination of perennials and annuals. Kind of gives you the best of both worlds without, going full bore one way or the other. This one here is the two plots together were about a quarter acre. So this one here is obviously about an eighth of an acre, but we tilled it up. He's hand broadcasting that with a whirlybird spinner, and I think he had the trigger thing set on about 2. But what food plots are something that we've, obviously Eric being an agronomist, I mean, kind of makes me think. There's a lot of food plot material on the market, and believe it or not, food plots still take some research. And some companies have umpteen different food plots, and it kind of, you go to the store and you look at what's available, and you kind of stand there and have to scratch your head like, what do I plant, or what do I even want to plant? And we tried to simplify it as simple as possible. We've got an annual brassica mix, which is a really great, you know full bore forage for. I mean, you can plant the stuff in the spring and it'll grow great and be food over the summertime, but the highest nutritional bang for your buck would be, planting a thing early fall and getting a really heavy growth for those deer throughout the fall months. Our perennial blend, you can get that in early spring or in late fall, whenever you want to start it. And then that's going to, you're going to have a very long term plot there. This sanctuary that we're putting out, it's going to get a lot of good growth right off the bat with our annuals, and give the deer immediate forage over the spring and summer months, which will then lead into the perennials into the fall months. And then, eventually you can just leave it as a perennial plot. If you want to overseed with some more perennial seeds, you can. If people want to kill it back every spring, it's just one of the longest growing food plots if you were to plant it in the spring. But food plots are half of the key to the situation. I think a lot of people think, well, we can just put out bags of stuff, which that's kind of how I formulated our Rackology, so that people that can't or don't put out food plots will get the maximum amount of nutrition. But food plots are something that if you can put them out, you really need to, because it's the most natural way for deer to consume nutrients. It's very, obviously it's very palatable because it's all natural. And so, that just kind of, brings our product line around, kind of 360 or 365, the plot 365 that we got, I guess. But, just another great way for the deer to get their nutrition is from a food plot. Not only that, states that you can't supplement in. This is the only way the deer are going to get, some good nutritional value. And then to take it a step further, that's really why we went full bore formulating our fertilizer, which I don't know if you want me to go on to
Sure.
that yet or not.
Yeah, and what I was thinking as you were talking is, you've got the feed on Rackology, and then I was thinking, if you've got your food plots and your feed, does your feed then aid in the uptake of nutrients from your food plot as a complement? Because I was thinking about the micronutrients.
Yeah, well, some of the ingredients that we've got in our Rackology meal and our vitamin mineral combo um, are geared for um, it's kind of like you could call it a prebiotic. It's something that gets the gut room and ready to start digesting more efficiently. So yeah, I mean, having that in combination is the best of both worlds. If people can afford to do everything, I mean, obviously, the more you do, the better it's going to be, to a certain extent. But it does complement each other. And on the same token, eating, from the food plot, that roughage is good for the deer too. I mean, I just have to say that they both would complement each other, really.
For the hunter out there that's trying to get an edge on his neighbor, he said, I want to make sure that I attract those deer to my property, and my neighbor hunts too. Do you find that this functions pretty well as an attractant?
The food plot.
The food plot in your supplement. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, definitely. That deer that you had a picture up there with Jess earlier, it, he's got a very large volume of deer that hangs out on his place and is not going over to the neighbors very often. So does it hold deer there? You're darn right it does. And having that combination holds them even tighter. Places where you just have the meal, the Rackology out, you know, if they're needing the stuff, it's going to hold them there. Having greens on the ground is going to hold them there. Also, I mean, I'd say equally. And when you combine the two, if you don't give the deer any reason at all to leave, uh, they won't. Now, with that said, bucks, I've done a lot of research on this, a lot of research on radio collared bucks. I mean, they'll take a sabbatical, once, once a season, sometimes more, but kind of one big trip, and that's kind of when you may lose some of your deer that might get shot, and that's you know bucks cut their feeding down sometimes by upwards as half, if not more, during the rut. They just don't eat. I mean, they've got other things on their mind.
In your work, and this is not necessarily on topic, but talk about the water availability. So let's say that this piece of ground in this picture here, water's a certain distance away, and versus having water, let's say over there by that feeder. Will as far as volume of water and proximity to water, travel patterns and so on, what were your observations when you were studying them?
Well, one thing I will say is with a food plot, especially a good lush one, deer aren't adapted quite like antelope and some of your desert critters, but deer can drink less water if they're consuming plants that contain high volumes of water. So if you have a really good lush food plot and it's able to sub-irrigate, um, the deer are going to get, quite a bit of their water value out of those plants. Um, Now, if water's not what type of a limiting factor is water? Well, I mean, obviously water is huge. If you don't have water around, you're not going to have deer. It's kind of like in the wintertime, this one pasture that I hunt that's just north of my place, after the cattle get out, like in October, November ish, he shuts the tanks down. Well, there was absolutely no water out there in that whole section, and you can just tell that the deer move from being out in that tall grass, native grass. I mean, it's a great place to hide, and they'll go out there to bed and stay, but they've got to go about a mile to get to water. And so the majority of those deer are staying around the perimeter of that property and not in the middle. So, I mean, water is huge from that standpoint. The other thing that water is big on, and I was just talking with one of our customers the other day, he's out of state, and he got in on the tail end of an argument about, baiting spreading disease in other states. And I says, in the research I've done, what I found to be the biggest disease spreader is water. Your, like our vitamin and mineral mix, there's enough, couple things, there's enough uh, minerals and the salt content and everything that's probably going to take care of, a number of viruses and bacteria that, they're going to only be able to live so long in that feed before they die because it's too dry and it's too nasty of an environment. Whereas water, I mean, most of these microorganisms can stay viable in that water for days and days, if not weeks. And so places that are very arid and have those tricklers or those guzzlers, those water deals that, people put out for deer,
Mhm.
if all the deer are going to that one or two or three guzzlers, to me, that just screams a much larger disease potential than than having a few piles of feed here and there. So I do get the concern with and I'm kind of getting off a topic here onto this other one. I mean, I do get the concern of feeding causing maybe having any potential for spreading disease, but your water sources are, I feel, a more primary disease vector, even though it's not alive, than some food sources. And here's the other thing too: when deer are out eating, you watch them graze across the field, and one week they're all hitting this one little spot, so they're all exchanging saliva there. Then next week, a different type of a plant comes into season, and they're all in this one area, eating heavily, exchanging saliva there. So even your food sources are going to be an exchange. Even in nature, it's not like, a lot of people think that they're out there grazing. They got this whole pasture, whole whatever to graze on. Deer are very selective and picky about what they're eating at different times of the year, and so I'm more concerned disease-wise about water, so than
Okay.
I am about feed. But yeah, water is huge.
Well, I did get off topic, and I apologize. But it's interesting. You think about it as an add-on and an edge. And so we've now gone to this is your talk about what this one is.
This is our Plot 365. It's our premium perennial blend. It's got a very good mix of. And this is one thing that I really had Eric's help with. Him being the agronomist, I knew what I wanted, but I want to make sure that these were things that what my research was leading him back, because I have a very intense background in biology. I went very deep into nutrition also. Not that I went so far as becoming a nutritionist, but I went really heavy into those avenues. And, I guess I'm one that when I feel like I may be a little weak in one area, I like to bring a professional on. And it just so happens, Eric's an agronomist. And, we got a number of different clover types that are in that. Chicory stuff that's listed on the back, so it's not like it's a big secret for anybody's food plot. The ratios that Eric did come up with in there are something that I feel is kind of big, because a lot of times you don't stop to think, and this is where Eric's knowledge is huge. If I were just to put, 25% this, 25% that, 25, 25, is that going to be good? And, the answer is no, because there are certain plants that you don't want in as high a volume, because they're a lot more aggressive growing, and they're going to take up more space, and they're going to choke your other stuff out. And so, ratioing of those seeds, is kind of a big thing that he really shed some light on for me. And, and the other thing too was his selection of, not just any old clovers, what certain specific types, number one, number two, of those types, where that seed comes from also plays a role in its viability. So it's, like I said, we didn't want to spare any expense on anything, because we're making it for ourselves first and foremost. And just so happens that people love our products. But the Plot 365, that's supposed to signify as, that's a perennial plot. You'll get year-round use out of that, even into the winter months. Your clovers and your legumes like that will stay green. You'll see deer out grazing on an alfalfa field in the middle of winter, even though it's brown, they're still getting some nutritional value out of it.
Sure. Well, let's go. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Not your normal fertilizer. So this is you guys with the rental tractor again.
Yeah.
Let's go. Is that it? Yeah, that's it.
Yep, that's the front of the bag. Yep. This is something that we'd been thinking on and researching and working on for quite a while. And what really kind of sped things up for me was we had a call. In fact, is after we done one of a podcast, and the guy's from Illinois, and he says, "I tell you what," he goes, "I totally believe in your products, but we own a guide service, and legally we can't put out mineral. We can't supplement our deer. We can't give them nothing. We can't even put mineral out in the summertime. Just nothing, absolutely at all." And he says, so if you can put your Rackology, if you can figure out how to put your Rackology, everything in one bag, if you can put that into a plant, he said, you'll have something. And so I went to Eric and I says, man, we need to kick this thing into high gear. This has to come out with our new line of food plots and everything. And the thing that we kept coming back to is every fertilizer on the market. I shouldn't say every, most. All it is NPK, your nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And plants need that for their own, everything from cell structure, the cellulose growth, chlorophyll, root and stem elongation. All those nutrients are super important for that plant. But as far as for the critters that are eating it, plants don't take in nutrition. They don't try and take in extra nutrition for the animals. They take in what they need, and as by default, they do absorb some from the soil. And that's why, animals have to eat X number of plants in order to get their nutritional value. Well, what I wanted was not just your normal NPK. I wanted our Rackology as much as totally possible to be in those plants. And so, Eric, set out to, basically do that. And what we came up with is something that, it's as natural as possible, which is kind of crazy. It's got the fertilizer, part to it too, because the plants need that. But it puts in a number of those nutrients, those minerals and vitamins that normally a plant, when they're growing, some of these minerals are big enough that they don't cross the cell membrane as efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
And so what this does is it puts, like all of our Rackology products for the deer are chelated, which I noticed, it's funny. I actually noticed a number of competitors in stores now that I didn't see before are putting chelated on their bag. So I don't know if they chelated or if they're just putting it on there. And I'm not sure if we caused that or not, but it made me kind of feel good. But what it does, it takes these components and it chelates them for the plant. So it allows them to be as absorbable as possible and allows more of it to cross the cellular membrane and uptaking that for the plant, which then get passed on to the deer. So that was what, to me, and I give Eric so much credit for this, knowing what to get and what to put together. I mean, you know, nowhere else are these things really found together like this. They may be in separate forms in agriculture, but um, it literally is the epitome of a fertilizer because now you can put this stuff on, and not only is your plants going to have awesome growth, but your deer are going to super benefit from those plant sources because of this fertilizer, and it really needs to be absorbed up. Have it available in the ground because ultimately, as deer graze on those plants, they graze them off and they regrow, right? So they need to be able to continue to take this up from the soil. Um, it kind of gets a little bit complicated when you get into the how fertilizers work and how nutrients are absorbed by plants and everything. But you know, I asked Eric, I'm like, we want to do this, we want to do this the right way. What's the best way? Should we have this stuff, liquid? Should we put it on the plants? How should this work? And Eric's like, no, this got to go in the soil, and this is the best. This is the best way to get it into your plants. Number one, number two, it's going to be there all growing season, not just a one shot deal.
And you have the same challenges with pH on the soil that they have to address before it can be picked up properly.
Yeah, and that's when we design this, Eric says, the average most people's food plots, they can go out and plant our stuff, put this on, and they will be fine. Now, if you got somebody that really wants to get serious about their food plot, which I mean, I would recommend people do this anyways, but it's not, I would consider getting a soil test, you know, testing your soil, seeing what you need. Where does your NPK stand on your soil? Do you have enough potassium? Do you have enough nitrogen? If everything is pretty close to the where it should be, then you probably don't need to add anything. But if your soil is too acidic, if it's too basic, then you either have to add lime or something to balance that pH out. Now, some of our bigger clients, guys that are, they're putting 10-acre food plots on up to, we're working with one guy that potentially in the future, if we get his whole business, rather than him just kind of mixing the stuff himself and trusting us with it, we might be, putting in 80 to 100-acre food plot, or not
Yeah,
us, but, getting them set up with it. And, that's the type of place where you really have to pay attention to the soil, because you've got such large food plot areas that, one little offset is going to cost you a huge amount. Whereas smaller food plots, if you don't have a place that you can send your stuff off, which, um, most laboratories around will do your soil testing.
oh yeah, the
We use
oh yeah,
Ward laboratories. People
your
send
local
us.
ag guy, your local ag
Yeah,
extension. I mean, like the
yeah.
farmers
Use
go and
your
get it done. Yeah, local ag.
Well, Eric's an agronomist, so you just find your local agronomist, give him the dirt. He'll explain to you how to do it. You'll probably want 4 or 5 different spots. You scratch off the top surface stuff, and you take, fill your bag from what's below it, and in 4 or 5 spots, and you give it to your agronomist, and they can pull a food plot analysis for you, or a soil analysis for you, and tell you what you're missing or what you got good. And so I don't know, probably weekly right now. One of these days, I told Eric it'll probably be a lot more. Guys call him a lot and say, here's what my readout is, or they'll email it to him, and then when he has a chance to look at it, he'll email them back and say, okay, you can put our fertilizer on. That's all you need to do, or put our fertilizer on, but add a little bit of, N, P, or K, or whatever. And so, we can get really down to the wire, if you want. And that's just kind of the cool thing of, when you got 2 professionals on board with you, you can call us and talk to us about, any of those issues, what you need, or what, any type of advice. I mean, that's something that we just offer free to our clients. Whereas, anywhere else you'd get charged for a lot of that type of
So,
information or help.
do they email you, or do they phone call you?
Everything. We get texts, we get emails, we get phone calls, we get messages through our website. So they come in a number of different ways. We
Okay.
did have had a few questions come through Instagram even.
Well, it's interesting for me in the part of the world that I grew up in. The lime, you have to lime the farm all the time to take in and get your uptake proper. So we're now going into the soil, a living entity, and I don't know if this is the proper thing to have on or not.
Oh, it's one of our other great food plot blends. That's a brassica mix. That's our annual. So there's a number of types of grasses and brassicas in there. The brassicas end up getting really big and leafy, so they pretty much take over the spot eventually. That's why you really don't want them mixed very heavily with anything else. But any plants, soil health is everything. And that's what our fertilizer aims also to do. That's kind of another benefit that you're getting, is not only you're putting everything in that soil for that plant, for that deer, the additive, the stuff that we have in our fertilizer helps to make the soil bacteria, the soil microbes, as healthy and happy as possible. And I know last time we spoke, did a podcast there with Bruce. I think I told this story where there's a university that did this study that they buried whitey tighties, cotton underwear, and they had one field that was a fully disked, and it was tilled every year. And then they had another field that was semi-tilled, and then another field that was totally not tilled. They no-tilled it. So they buried 4 or 5 whitey tighties in each field. When they checked it a few months later, what they noticed was the field that had gotten tilled all the time had when they pulled the whitey tidies out, there wasn't really even very many holes in it. In fact, they just kind of looked stained or soiled, so to speak, and which showed that there wasn't a whole lot of microbe growth in that soil because the cotton hadn't broken down, in the fully tilled field. It just kind of wrecked the soil. Then they've got the other field that was semi-tilled, and that one had some, had a few holes in the underwear, but not as many as the untilled, the no-tilled field. When you leave those microbes alone and don't turn them around and expose them to oxygen all the time, because a lot of these are, they may be anaerobic or obligate anaerobes, and they, it kind of kills them back. And so those underwear were totally destroyed. All that was left was the elastic waistband. And to me, that really just signifies what real true soil health should look like. And that's, when all of your microbes are available, they're working as efficiently as possible, they're going to help your plant to take in more nutrients. So to till it all the time and to do that kind of stuff, it looks cool having a really nice, neat field or plot. But there's a lot to be said about no tilling and having total soil health. I mean, I really can't say enough about that.
I'm thinking here as we've been at this for a little while, and if there's somebody listening and they're going like, well, am I the ideal or the potential client for Rackology? So if you were to describe your ideal customer or consumer of Rackology, who is that person? What do they look like?
Well, a couple things. First thing that comes to my mind is from the business standpoint, they call it branding. Not only just our logo and our name, but like big time with like, what are we? Who are we? What do we stand for? And my first thought to your question was, I mean, everybody is a Rackology customer potentially, whether it's somebody that can only afford to put out one mineral lick for their deer. They're a Rackology customer, all the way up to the people that want to do it 100%. And, they're year round using, most of the products. I mean, granted, if you only got one food plot, you're not going to put all three of our food plot mixes out there. But, for me, potentially everybody is a Rackology customer because, not only do we have scientifically researched products, from a biologist and agronomist, our branding is, we want people that are totally focused on their deer's health. Whether you can afford just to put out mineral or whether you can afford to do the whole shebang. Our idea is, you're wanting the best for your deer as possible. So that's who we want for our customers, is the people that really want to, that are interested in doing something for their deer, not just, we get a lot of guys that say, well, but I just put out corn. Well, we're right in the middle of the Midwest, and it's a lot tougher to sell the product here, simply because everybody has I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people have this old, this thought process that, well, they got plenty of groceries out there. And every time I hear that they got plenty of groceries, I just want to puke, because it's like, I've got tons and tons of pictures of our deer with a cornfield, a bean field, an alfalfa field, but yet they're still coming to the food plot. They're still hammering Rackology all late summer and fall, and they've got all these other groceries out there. So, it's good that there's all these other food sources out there, but people don't realize that they don't contain everything that a deer needs. I mean, corn is only 8% ish protein, and growing fawns, antlers, lactating does, I mean, you're wanting upwards of 14% protein, on up to 16 to 18. At certain times of the year, some deer will even take upwards of 20. But you want to be careful. Some companies have very high protein. That can actually have an adverse effect on fawns. And, that's something that I see that, a lot of the stuff in the deer industry, you can tell is not fully researched. They basically took glorified livestock products and slapped a deer sticker on it and said, here's the next best thing. And, sometimes it can be bad for your deer. You can have high fawn mortality rates because, you've got the wrong thing or too much of the right thing out there. So,
Bruce, you've been pretty quiet, bud.
I think he's sleeping back there. I thought I heard him snoring.
No, I wasn't snoring yet. But, Jason and Eric's not here, but when I first did the podcast, I came back to Bob, who's, doing a lot of things for Whitetail Rendezvous. And I said, these guys got it together. And you bring things to the table that some people don't know about, other people may know about, but they're not espousing that because it's all knowledge. And what we want to do here at Whitetail Rendezvous is bring knowledge out and let people, percolate on it and digest it. And then the business is going to go wherever it's going to go with all our guests. But I'm just continually impressed with how you understand what the deer needs. And you're exactly right. Too much of a good thing is too much of a good thing and can destroy or kill deer. And so I thank you for that. We're a little bit over an hour, Bob. So last thoughts, Jason?
Oh, I guess my final or overall thoughts are just, you need to step back, customer wise, need to step back and just kind of ask themselves. This is the first question we ask if we have somebody that's, semi-serious. It's not just wanting a little bag, is what do you want to accomplish? You have to ask yourself, what do I want to accomplish? Do I want, amazing food plots? Do I want to put out, meal and mineral? Do I, what do I want to do? Do I want to grow big bucks? Do I want the healthiest deer possible? Do I just want to be able to go out and shoot a deer? I mean, we got guys around here that, we tell them all the time, you can't eat the antlers. And then they complain because they never see any big bucks, but they're shooting all the little ones. And they're happy doing that though. They go out there and that's what they want to do. And so kind of my final thoughts would be just, think about what you want to accomplish, with what, with your deer. And if it's something that we can help you with, we're pretty easily accessible. We haven't, one of our dealers asked the one day, at some point he says, will we be able to actually talk to you guys the way we do now? And my answer to that is yes. I mean, we will never get to the point where we're not going to be available for our dealers and our customers. Cause I mean, to me, that's our niche, which is biology for job. That's what we want to accomplish and what we want to be there for is that, and making, have people see the results that we're seeing, not just for some big business thing to try and make a lot of money on. So, what do you want? What do you want for your deer?
Hey, next up on the show is a good friend of mine from Wisconsin, John O'Brien. And John's got a company called Grandpa Ray Outdoors, and you've heard him a couple of times on the show. And I keep going back to John because he's always got something interesting to say about building a great deer herd, a balanced deer herd, a healthy deer herd, a deer herd that has some great competition for the bucks. The does are healthy, especially during when they're lactating and taking care of their fawns. So John brings a wealth of experience, over 26 years of experience to the table. So sit back, relax, and enjoy John O'Brien, Grandpa Ray Outdoors.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, where you can listen and learn from the experts so you can be more successful on your next hunt. Until next time, listen, learn, and succeed.